Well, hey there, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Minnesota Rockstars podcast. And today we have Paul Kuske with us, and he is our former conservation officer here in central Minnesota. I told you guys we were going to have him on for the first episode, but the audio wasn't up to par, so we had to throw another podcast in there, and we're re-recording this one here. But Paul, thanks for being with us here today.
Very welcome.
Before we get going here, why don't you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing throughout the years?
Yeah, so I was a conservation officer here in the Morrison County area from 1989 through 2017, and so I've been retired a few years now. I had a little bit of a unique career. I spent my whole career in the same station, and that's unusual in this occupation. But just really fell in love with the area, the people. I just really fell in love with the people and the communities, and so I spent my whole career right here.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And
Yeah,
when you can stay in one spot for that long, whether it's in professional sports or whatever, it's really looked at very professionally, and obviously you did a pretty good job being that you're in the same spot for that long.
I tried my best.
Yes. So how many years did you say you were a CO?
It ended up being 28 and a half.
28 and a half. Okay.
Yep. I had some federal time, so I had 32 years of service altogether.
Okay. So what is, like, looking back, like when you first started to when you finished up or even now, what are some of the biggest differences that you see or have seen throughout the years from then till now?
So one of the first things that I came to realize when I got stationed in Piers, and it was kind of interesting because the officer whose footsteps I followed in, he had a much different style of approaching the job, and wasn't necessarily liked by a lot of people. So when I got here, a lot of people saw I was wearing the same uniform, thought I was the same type of a person, which I wasn't. And for the first year and a half, 2 years, I was like, what did I get myself into? But that changed as people got to know me and what I expected of people and my style of work. I think the biggest thing that I instantly realized is that this job turned into a lifestyle. It's not a 9 to 5 job. It's a lifestyle. Even when I'm off duty, if I'm downtown at the hardware store, I would get approached, questions, or want to talk, things like that. Sunday morning in church. I mean, it just never shut off. I was okay with that because I just was really enjoyed that job and the lifestyle. So that worked for me.
So in developing those relationships, like you said, when you first came in, it was kind of difficult. How what do you think were some of those things that helped you build relationships with the general public around here? Like, did you see yourself like forcing yourself to go have conversations with people, like you were saying, whether it was at church or in the hardware store, like, hey, I just need to get out there and start talking to people so they get to know me, or what was it?
Probably one of the biggest things, one of the first things was I just walked downtown or stopped downtown and went and had a beer
Mm-hmm.
with some of the people. And they're like, this guy must, he can step down and have a beer with us guys. That's kind of cool. Morrison County area has such wonderful, active snowmobile clubs and ATV clubs and things like that, and sportsmen's clubs. And I interjected myself into there. The snowmobile clubs, especially, were huge in just developing that working relationship. They were just awesome. And like one of the times I went to the snowmobile club when I first got hired and got stationed here, I said, "What do you want me to do? These are your trails. What do you want me to do?" And I don't think they had ever been asked that question before. And that really broke the ice, and it showed them that, hey, I work for them, and it really worked out well.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the same thing like with me in education. When I'm out at the grocery store and one of my students sees me out in the grocery store, they look at me and they're like, "Oh my goodness, he exists outside, the school walls." But that's great that you became a part of those things. And like you said, you're working for them. What do you want? And once you build that connection, I think things really start working in the right way. But what you think about conservation officer, law enforcement, all that stuff? There's a lot of duties that come with it. It's pretty intense work. What made you want to become a CO?
You know, I look back now, and I'm actually kind of an anomaly, because when I was in seventh grade, I read a book about a federal game warden. I can't remember the title of the book, but I just fell in love with the idea of the job. I always liked the outdoors. I had a high school teacher that was extremely influential in steering me toward this type of work. And I'm still friends with him today. We hunt together. But, that's how influential teachers, just like you, can be on a person, a young person. So that was huge for me.
What are some things that caught you off guard? Like when you go into something, you have all these ideas, when you're going to school, you're younger, it's like, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And then all of a sudden, boom, something catches you off guard and you're like, okay, I wasn't prepared for this, but I got to figure it out.
You know, it's kind of the cowboy mentality. We, for the most part, conservation officers work alone, and a lot of times get yourself into situations where you got to use a little bit of ingenuity, a little perseverance to try to figure out, how to get either into the situation or out of the situation. And I think the ability to really think on your feet, um, using very good verbal skills. I think that was one of the best things I learned as a young officer, is how to use good verbal skills and how to just relate to people. And that alone got me out of so many different situations. Um, a quick story: when I first was stationed here, within like the first year, I had a person call me up and said, "Hey, there's this guy down at the bar, and he's been shooting his mouth off several times. That if you ever show up at his place, he's going to shoot you." And I'm like, "Huh, I got to go meet this guy." So I drove out to his house one day and I knocked on his door, and you should have seen the look on his face when I was standing at the door. But we sat down at the kitchen table over a cup of coffee and visited for probably, I don't know, maybe a couple hours. And that's all it took. We had a great working relationship the rest of my career.
Now, in those situations like that you're talking about, did you take classes or were you educated on how to handle yourself in stressful situations, or is that just something that you naturally have? I mean, like you said, wording things specifically, um, controlling your emotions, all that stuff. Was that talked to you guys a lot about in school and stuff?
It was, a lot of it is just your own natural abilities. It really is. I read lots of books like on body language and things like that,
Mhm.
which I loved using. But yeah, a lot of it is just your own ability. I mean, I know some officers that they say hello and people just freak
Mhm.
out, and the next guy can say the most outlandish things and they're laughing and shaking hands.
Yeah.
So
I think tone of voice is big, when it comes to that. Because like I said, I deal with a lot of stressful situations in sports and stuff, and all of a sudden, sometimes I don't handle myself the way I should. I'm sitting there yelling and barking at people, and it's like my assistant's got to reel me back in and say, "All right, calm down, call." But so speaking of those situations, let's go in depth here a little bit and maybe explain a situation that was, I don't know, one of the craziest situations you've ever been a part of.
yeah, I know you and I have, I've shared a bunch of different stories with you, and some of them are probably way too long for this podcast. But and this is kind of old history, but back around 1990, we really started using the deer decoy to combat road hunters and trespassing issues. And I don't know, that time period, road hunting was just so big, and I think that's when deer populations were starting to, spike a little bit, and it was just a lot of issues around that. So we started using the deer decoy, which was a great fun tool. I don't know if it's as effective today for officers, just because the climate has changed, the culture has changed a little bit. But when we first started using the deer decoy, oh my goodness. I think the first year I used it, I had 22 arrests with it. It was pretty crazy, but we had it set up one time, and actually it's not too far from your house. Had it set up, and we have one officer that sits real close by to watch it, and then another officer in a chase vehicle. Well, this vehicle comes by really slow, and it goes up the road a little ways and parks. And a guy and his wife is walking back down the road, and he's got the rifle in his hand. And every once in a while, he would stop and kneel down and look at the deer decoy through the scope. And the whole time, we can hear her saying this, because we're sitting in the ditch right there, hiding. She's like, "Don't shoot it. That's one of those DNR deer. Don't shoot it." And he's like, "No, that's a nice buck. And we're going to get that." And she's like, "I'm telling you right now, don't shoot that deer. It's a DNR deer." He's like, "You don't know what you're talking about." And he levels off and kawam, kawam, shoots that thing and puts a couple rounds into it. Of course, we come down, and in the process of sitting there writing him the ticket and stuff, she's standing there just proud as a peacock with her hands on her hips going, "I told you, I told you." So guys, that whole women's intuition thing, it's real.
So that was at night.
During the day? Oh no,
Oh, that was during the day.
That's during the day.
Holy
Yeah.
buckets!
Yeah,
Wow.
road hunting situation.
That's insane. I've just never felt the urge, no matter how big of deer I've seen, to do that, and it's just I don't know. It just blows my mind that people would just pull over the side of the road and shoot. I know someone who was in a deer stand and in a box stand and sitting there watching this little forkhorn out in the alfalfa field eating, and all of a sudden this vehicle drives up on the road, and all of a sudden he sees the window roll down, and this person I know is just going to sit there and watch it. They weren't going to shoot it. This vehicle pulls up on the road. He sees the window roll down, and sure enough, here comes a gun out the window. Boom, deer drops right in its tracks. Vehicle drives off. He was sitting there right in the stand. It was one of those half box stands, so you can see the upper portion of his body, it was orange. And the person shoots it basically right in front of him and takes off driving. It's like, what are you doing? I mean, so basically what they ended up doing is, yeah, you got a description of the vehicle, but good luck finding the individual. Basically what we ended up doing is cutting up the deer and
Yep.
eating the
Yep.
deer. So, I mean,
Yep.
it's about all you could do in that situation, but I don't know. It's frustrating. It's probably something that will never end. People shooting from the road, you wish it would, but I don't know. It's frustrating. After all the time and effort that people put in, whether it's buying properties or developing properties or whatever, just time spent out there away from your family, to go out there and enjoy hunting, then all of a sudden somebody comes out and ruins it. It makes it pretty
Well, it's like
frustrating.
the whole baiting thing. I saw so many situations where individuals were baiting for deer. They didn't need to.
Yeah.
All they needed to do was hunt. It's kind of silly.
It is. So speaking of like baiting and stuff, different, states have legalized baiting.
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota obviously does not. What roles do COs play when it comes to coming up with these rules and regulations?
So deer hunting rules in particular. Now, granted, there's lots of different things, fishing and lots of different hunting, ATVs, snowmobiles, whatever. But deer in particular, the Division of Enforcement has what is called a deer committee. And there's a number of current COs that sit on that committee along with wildlife managers from throughout the state that review problems, review law, legislative proposals and things like that, make changes to existing laws, but it's kind of a think tank. I served on that committee for about 20 years, really enjoyed that. Played a very huge role in crafting our current baiting law, our current shining law, as we would call it. Worked on things like party hunting, lots and lots of different things, and really enjoyed that. Got to pick apart, legislative proposals and kind of craft them to make them enforceable and workable.
So is it majority of people on that committee end up voting on things, or how does that work when, like, say you come up with the idea of we're going to do this, like, does it come down to a vote, or how does it work to get put in place?
Pretty much, we would just make recommendations, and we would forward those recommendations to different department heads down in St. Paul. And I mean, I had several sit-down meetings with legislators themselves that are sponsoring certain bills to get them to understand why the language needs to say this or that. So there's a lot of hands-on stuff. It was pretty rewarding, actually.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some things that maybe you've seen throughout the years, or what we do now, or maybe there's some things we've gotten rid of, but like, what are some things that you like what Minnesota has done throughout the years?
Well, and we'll stay on the deer hunting aspect of it. I mean, Minnesota has become, it's very liberal as far as being able to take deer. I don't know if that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing when it comes to our youth, where it gives our youth a lot of opportunity to harvest deer. But the flip side of things in this state, and I know you and I have had this discussion about party hunting, um, it also creates some problems. Um, yeah, are we a $1 state?
Nope.
Nope. We're a state where you can shoot as many bucks as you can, as long as you can find tags to put them on. So it's kind of an unfortunate situation, and I think it hurts us as a state as far as quality bucks. We still shoot some nice bucks in this state, but compared to what other states are and what we could be, I think we could do a better job. Um, but I do like the fact that we have really catered to the young hunter, and I think that's important for the future. Nowadays, kids are so distracted by instant gratification of video games and stuff like that, that if they have to go out in the woods and sit in a stand and spend a couple of days and not seeing anything, do we risk losing that person as a hunter? Absolutely.
um, yeah, I've always, when I was younger, I liked party hunting. Um, I don't know, it's just one of those things. Back when I started hunting, it was kind of the brown it's down era,
Mm-hmm.
and as time has gone on, I'm like, I don't really care for party hunting too much, because I've seen people abuse it where it doesn't make it as enjoyable for the rest of the party. you know,
Yeah.
um, where you have one person shooting six deer or five deer, four deer, whatever it is, and then all of a sudden you have other people in the party that are frustrated, and they're like, "Well, why should I give my tag to you? I want to shoot my own deer." Well, then all of a sudden, all heck breaks loose, and tempers flare, whatever. But it's just something I think that you pay for the tag. You know, that person should have the right to go out, shoot their own deer, which they do, but just end it at that. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't need to be using other people's tags. Is one person going to eat six deer? I don't think so. But I mean, it's what it is. We allow party hunting here, but I sure would like to see the state move away from it eventually. I think it would help out our conservation officers a lot. Um, I know you have some experience that you've had to issue tickets and punishment for people that were using tags of
Sure.
people who weren't even hunting.
Oh
So,
yeah. Oh yeah.
and that's that'd be one less headache for all the COs out there.
I
But
always I always kind of called it, it's actually it's theft in my mind. You're stealing an opportunity away from somebody else that could have an opportunity of shooting a nice buck, where you're going out and shooting multiple bucks. You're kind of stealing an opportunity away from somebody else, and I don't know. That's kind of the way I always looked at it.
right now, a big topic in Minnesota is crossbows.
Yeah.
Okay, just I just thought of this right now. How many poaching incidents were you a part of with crossbows?
Uh,
I mean, is it less than half of them? I mean, was it more rifle firearms, or were there some crossbows out there?
some very rare actually.
Okay.
So when I was on the deer committee, and this was probably, I don't know how many years ago, they were looking at the demographics of license sales. And in the world of archery hunting, at about age 50, 51, 52, the archery license sales just took a nosedive. Well, that's because a lot of guys were getting to the point where they couldn't pull a bow back anymore for physical reasons. So there was this big dump. And at that time, even there, we were like, well, let's look at making crossbows, more accessible to people so they can continue hunting. And that was really the goal back. Well, the original law was, was it 60 and above, I believe,
Yeah. Yep.
where people could use just to get people out hunting
Hmm.
again. Well, now they've made it open all the way across the board. Um, but my experience, no, it really
Sure.
wasn't a poaching tool. It showed up once in a while
Okay.
in the state.
I know it's just one thing I was thinking of. Like, I don't know, I was talking to someone the other day, and the local archery dealer um, said it's tough to keep crossbows in stock right now.
Oh, I bet.
He said they're going off the shelf
I
left and
bet.
right, and it just makes me wonder if there's going to be more of that now. Being that there's this many crossbows out there, if the poaching numbers are going to go up or not, I don't know. It just seems like a tool that people can use very easily.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and I hope people don't abuse it that way. It's just one of those things where I talked about this on the last podcast. Um, there's a reason why they made crossbows legal for, what was it, 60 and above, or people with disabilities, and I am totally
Yes.
fine with that. And the reason why they made it that way is because it's a lot easier to use than a normal compound bow or long
Yeah.
bow. Um, and that's what, for me, it kind of it it turns me upside down a little bit to think that you know anyone can use them throughout the entire archery season, which, whatever, that's the new law now. You can, and it is what it is. But um I don't know, we'll see what happens this year. I think the numbers are going to change a lot. I could be wrong, but I think there's going to be, especially after this harsh winter, and then with crossbows out there, I think the deer harvest numbers are going to go up big time. And I'm just wondering what that's going to do to our deer population after this hunting season.
It will be interesting to see the numbers for
Yeah.
sure. Yep.
Um, so what are some things that, I don't know, you kind of hit on this a little bit, but what would you like to see as far as change goes, in the state of Minnesota, if there's anything that you can think of off the top of your head?
Um, as far as different laws, I'm the person that I don't like having more laws and rules to be thinking about. And even when I was working, there'd be a whole new set of laws and rules that would come out every year. And so many times, myself and some of the other officers I worked with, we'd look at them and go like, "My goodness, do we really have to babysit people to this point?" And I like things that are simple, straightforward, that interject common sense. And I know that's probably the toughest thing to do on the planet. But I like that approach. Nowadays there's so many wildlife management decisions made from a political basis and not a biological basis. And that the biology and politics are getting mixed together to the point where they almost look alike. And I don't like that. I wish we would get back to looking at things from more of a biological standpoint. And that's tough to do. I'm dreaming, so I guess. Um, but for me, that I'm a hunter, I'm a fisherman, I'm a trapper, and I take a very practical approach to things. And even when I was working, there was a lot of rules and regulations that, yeah, if you broke it, yeah, you broke a regulation. But I really looked at things from an intentional standpoint, and practical application in a situation. I always used, new officers coming out of the academy are very black and white. And I always used to tell them, yeah, the law is written in black and white, but you enforce it in living color. And it's a little different type of law enforcement too, as for a conservation officer than say a sheriff's deputy, a police officer. I think you can look at things a little bit more in living color and not have to be so black and white.
And I think that would probably help you build those relationships like we were talking about before too, not?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Just so many times when, especially young people, I mean, kids that are out hunting and things like that, they make mistakes. And does it do justice to write some kid a ticket and put him through the juvenile justice system? No. It's one of those things where you become a teacher and an educator, you bring them home and sit down with mom and dad at the table, and it's amazing what you can get done doing that kind of stuff.
How about so kind of go along with that? Like you think about some of those situations where has there been a situation that somebody broke the law but had no clue that they were doing it? Like it was completely on accident. They had no clue.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, ignorance. I mean, gosh, we all suffer from that, and yeah, and that was that's part of the job of an officer in my mind. What I always try to do is try to figure out what's going on here. Is this person really intentionally doing this, or is it out of ignorance, or is it just an honest mistake? A lot of factors to go in there. Sure, I could approach every situation black and white. Yeah, you broke the law, you get a ticket, but that doesn't serve. I mean, I was in the business of changing people's behavior, and there's a lot of tools there that you can use.
So what are some of the common things that like people thought maybe were legal but weren't legal?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I don't know. Um, I think the biggest thing is just the constant rule changes all the time,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the world of fishing, where limits are changing all the time. Special regs where every lake you go to has a different regulation. It seems like, and it's a big job to keep up on that stuff.
Yeah, it is. And that's one thing that, for those people out there that go out of state and hunt, make sure you read their rules and regulations too, because you don't want to be, going to a different state and thinking that you're able to do something, and in reality you're not. Always check up on those deer regulations and rules, not only your own state but other states if you're traveling around. Um, kind of going back to those rules and regulations, who decides? Because I get this question all the time, and I ask the same question all the time. I can shoot X amount of deer here on this side of the road, but on the other side of the road, I can only shoot one. Like
Yeah.
how do they come to that, deciding how many deer and the zones and all that stuff?
Um, well, as you understand, you got to draw a line somewhere.
Hmm.
So unfortunately, sometimes you end up drawing a line right through people's hunting area. But for the most part, wildlife managers, when they divide it up the state into different areas and things like that, they look at the mixture of agriculture versus forest or mixed, kind of from a habitat standpoint to see how things lay out. Because you're going to have similar deer numbers in an agricultural area that's maybe versus an area that's maybe 50-50 forest ag. You're going to have different deer densities and things like that. So you get into that game of trying to draw lines around different areas in the state. They're going to have these similar habitats, and this is a very simplistic way to put it, but that's kind of where it starts.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Because I know, like around here, pretty heavily wooded,
Mm-hmm.
bear all over the place, and I have to apply for a bear tag.
Yeah.
And then you go, you know, just down the road here a little ways, and then into more agriculture land. Uh, you can buy them over the counter, and you hardly see bear. I mean, there's bear there. Don't get me wrong, but you see a lot more around here than there. But yet, I still have to apply for a tag here.
And with the world of bears, so you get into a situation there where the most impactful nuisance complaints happen in agricultural areas. So that's the areas where they're going to try to really deter bears from establishing territories and things like that, and allow more harvest in those areas, more liberal harvest versus an area where they can live and not cause as many nuisance problems.
Sure, sure.
Nuisance bears are they're a pain.
And that's why they have basically over the counter there,
Yeah.
and to help with that. Um, how big? Well, I'm not even going to go there. I'm not going there. I won't put you on the spot. Um, okay, say I get a situation here. You shoot a deer, it goes onto somebody else's property. It's going to happen again this year, and people need to know this. You shoot a deer, goes on somebody else's property. Can I just follow that blood trail and go, or what do I need to do?
So following that blood trail. Now, if you're on obviously if you're on property, you have permission, you're good to go. You come to a property line, and let's say it's a cornfield, picked cornfield, and there's no trespassing signs on it. you can continue to follow that blood trail onto that agricultural property. Now, what's the most courteous thing to do is to make a call to that landowner, contact them, say, hey, this is what's going on. It just reduces a lot of conflicts. But if you get to that property line and there's a no trespassing sign there, everything stops. Everything stops until you get permission to keep going. And I think that's probably where, in the heat of the moment, so many hunters end up causing big conflicts with adjoining property owners. Is when they they don't understand where they are, and this is one of the most important things to take care of before the season starts. Um, Myself and my neighbors that I hunt next to, before the season, we have a. It takes it's a 2-minute phone call just to iron things out ahead of time. Say, hey, if you get a wounded deer, just call me. We'll get it taken care of. There it is.
Have you had to deal with a lot of neighbor disputes
Oh
in
yeah,
the past?
lots of them, and it would be and so often it was a situation where I would show up and talk to the landowner that doesn't want the group to come on their property, and basically, try to talk to them and say, look, we got an injured deer. It's important to retrieve that. That's part of fair chase and ethical hunting, is to follow up on that. And a lot of times just having an officer show up as a mediator, you know,
It's deer hunting can be a lot of fun. It can be very stressful. Um, and I think people need to remember that it's a deer,
it,
and you know, it is what it is. Like you said, be proactive. Call your neighbors up before the season starts. Make sure everybody's on the same page. And like myself here, I don't go through my property very much. I was telling you a story earlier. Last year, I didn't go out in my woods at all, and I left everything. I want to leave it a sanctuary as much as possible. And I go out there the opening morning of firearm season, and I'm sitting there following my trail that I did not cut, I did not check on throughout the summer, and the grass was really tall. And all of a sudden, I see this big oak tree, huge oak tree, that has fallen over right on the trail. So now I'm crawling over the top of this thing. I ended up getting turned around a little bit, but I didn't go in there because I wanted to leave it a sanctuary, and it just caused a big headache, right? And I think it's important, especially in small acreage, that, if you want deer around, you want to see deer, you want to bring kids out and see deer, you got to leave your property alone. You want to see good bucks, whatever. You can't go messing around there a whole lot. Well, when it comes to hunting, if there's a deer that's wounded and there's a blood trail, I'm going to let somebody go through there. Like you said, it's the ethical thing to do, to find and harvest that deer. Um, and in return, you got to remember, so if you're not going to allow somebody to go on your property, you got to remember there might be a day where all of a sudden you shoot a nice deer and it goes onto their property.
yep,
How are they going to respond to you after you didn't allow them to go on your property?
yeah,
So that's one thing you got to keep in mind. I know, everybody's property is precious to them in their own way, and you have your own thoughts and stuff, but when it comes down to it, like myself, if I'm around, I told my neighbors here, if I'm around, I'd like to go with you through there,
yeah,
and follow it. And if I'm not home, I gave them my other neighbor's number, who I trust very much. We're pretty close. I gave them his number, and I said if he's around, I'd like for him to go there, with you through the woods. So, yeah, I think that's just the best thing to do. Now, when you come to that situation, all right. Now, here's a little story for you. There was an individual that was hunting, uh, and this buck come in, and I mean, I don't quote me on this, but I think it's in the 180s it ended up scoring, and it came in, and he shoots it, and he put a beautiful shot on it. I think he double lunged it. Don't quote me, but it didn't go far, and it tips over, and he goes out there and he's with his friends around this deer, and all of a sudden they heard something. They look back, and here comes a few people tracking a blood trail, and they said, "That's our deer. We had first blood." And they looked at it, and I think where the first person initially hit it was like in the lower leg. And the person that I know finished it off with a good clean kill. Whose deer is it?
I ended up in that kind of a situation more times over the years than I really cared to be, and there is no rule or regulation that says whose deer it is. It comes down to an ethical matter. And what I would do is I would say, okay, you two have 5 minutes to figure out who's going to put their tag on the deer, or I take it. Because if they're going to argue over who's going, somebody's got to put a tag on it.
Mm.
And it was interesting, again, you kind of play a mediator out in the middle of the woods. And I saw different scenarios play out. One person say, well, I'm going to tag it. You can have the meat. I'm going to take the antlers, blah, blah, blah. Or sometimes it was a kid shot the deer and you kind of nudge the other guy and say, hey, look, you don't want to do this to a kid. Just let him tag the deer. It's not that big a deer. So that kind of a situation. But ultimately, if I had people that could not make up their mind, and I had one nice buck that they could not make up their mind, and I grabbed onto the horns and started pulling it. Well, they made a decision really quick.
When push comes to shove, right? Yeah, it's I don't know. I have a tough time with the lower leg shot or something. Somebody saying that's my deer. Well, if it weren't for the other individual, that deer would still be roaming the woods. But
Yeah.
It's a tough situation to be in, and I think what ended up happening was the person that hit it first got to keep the buck, but had to buy the other individual replica.
Oh,
I think that's what they agreed upon. But yeah, it was a monster, and I couldn't imagine the choice of words that they were using during that time. But yeah. I'm kind of bouncing around here a little bit. It feels like, being that we already did this podcast once, it's like, hey, did I already ask this? I'm just going to throw a different question at you. The situation where you had to essentially throw the book at someone for something that they did. What was it that the person ended up losing, I should say?
Well,
what was it all?
In the world of game and fish, you not only can lose the animal that you shot or trapped or the fish you take, but you can lose the equipment, the firearms. In situations, you can lose your vehicle, you can lose your boat, and then to top it all off, you can lose your hunting privileges too. So my goodness, I think a lot of times people don't realize that I just poached a deer and I loaded it up in my pickup and drove it home. Okay, so now you're looking at losing the vehicle, losing the gun, losing the deer, paying restitution for the deer, and then plus losing your hunting privileges. And in the world of losing your hunting privileges, there's a pact between, I think it's up to like, I don't know, 40 some states right now, where if you lose it in Minnesota, you lose it in all these other states too.
Okay.
So it all goes out, nationwide.
Yeah. So when you guys take that in, what ends up happening with it?
So like the deer and stuff like that, I always had a list of people that wanted venison.
Okay.
It was never a problem to get rid of a deer. And I mean, there was days, I remember my wife was a conservation officer too. And I remember one time she came home, it was like mid-morning on opening day, and there are legs sticking out of the back of her truck like a porcupine. I'm like, what are you doing? Yeah, we always had places for the deer meat, always. Equipment, things like that, that all goes up on public auction.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then where are those auctions held?
There's an auction house, I think it was down in Zimmerman. The last one I heard about was down that way. They do them every 2 or 3 years, depending on how much inventory they have.
Okay. Yeah. I threw some questions out on Facebook before we did this interview, and people just shot some questions. What is the height limit for elevated deer stands? Do you know that offhand?
Well, um, I think they did away with that.
Okay.
I think the permanent stand is still at 16. Don't quote me. I haven't read the
Okay.
regulation,
Okay.
but like a portable stand, we always said you can put it as high up as you want to fall.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Um, the age limit for taking firearm safety class.
So the general rule is what we do in the group that I teach with, and most groups throughout the state, is taking it if they're going to be turning 12 that calendar year. They could take it before that, but it really doesn't pay. 10 and 11-year-olds can hunt in this state without firearm safety as long as they have an adult with them. But taking it, and I think waiting till they're just a hair more mature is better too. But yeah, we like to the year that they turn 12, that calendar year, take it that year.
Sure. Sure. Um, yeah, I know they've lowered, that age limit a little bit, and like you said, I'm for, making sure that they're mentally developed and more mature before they go out there and start handling firearms because in all honesty, I've seen some grown adults not handle their firearms,
Oh yeah.
in a manner that I wish they would. I mean, it's the old, having a conversation and all of a sudden they turn to talk to this person. I'm like, what are we doing here right now?
You know how many guns I had pointed at me over the course of
Oh,
my career? I mean, countless. Oh my goodness.
what do you say? Do you call them out on it?
Well, yeah. Or a lot of times I would just grab the end of the barrel.
Sure.
That way now I have control of that gun.
Yeah.
But oh yeah, it's
I know there was one time, you know, it was my brother and my uncle, and we were done hunting. We got back to the vehicle. And we were going to unload the guns, bolt actions. We all had bolt actions. And we all face away from each other when we're unloading. And my brother um, was going to jack the shell out, and he came up with the bolt. He was going to come up with the bolt, but he had his pinky down by the trigger. And he pulled back, and that gun went off. But he was facing the other direction. Good thing he was. Not that we're all just sitting there talking to each other and unloading the gun. But yeah, that was a scary moment. We're like, "Whoa, what just happened?" But
well, and if you ever want to get your hind end chewed by a conservation officer, um, this that you're sitting out on a road or you're next to your vehicles with your group talking, and the CEO might stop a quarter mile back and look at you with binoculars. And I've had people pick their rifles up and look at me through their scope.
jeez.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to get chewed out.
Now, let's say someone they want to do firearm safety courses.
Mm-hmm.
Where do they go to find some information on that, or how do they get signed up for that?
The best way is just go right to the DNR website. They list all the classes on there, whether it's an online class or an in-person class, and they've got a pretty good system right online to look at all that.
Okay.
I highly recommend all kids to go through the in-person class. I think the online class is a nice tool, but those kids do not get the same educational attention that they do in an in-person class.
Sure. Yeah. Always in person, hands on, all that good stuff. What is one thing that let's go this route. Deer season's just about here. Archery season's right around the corner, and then obviously firearm season's after that. What are some things that you would like all sportsmen to know going into this year, or like really double check this or that? Just a review or whatever it is, some important tips or things that you want to make sure that everybody knows going into the season.
So, as a conservation officer, and I was just talking to a friend of mine that's still working, a conservation officer up on the North Shore. And nowadays, people get themselves into situations because they aren't thinking and planning ahead, and they think that they can simply dial their cell phone up when they need rescuing or they need help. We were at this firearm safety class the other night, and we were talking to the kids, and this one girl, we were talking about, having a good, safe ladder to get up in your stand. And we're like, well, what if you fall? And she said, well, I'll just call my dad on my cell phone. Well, okay, does your cell phone work at your deer stand? Have you ever checked that out? And if you're laying there unconscious, your cell phone doesn't do you any good. So it's preparation ahead of time. Don't get yourself in over your head. Whether you're hiking way back into Timbuktu to sit in a deer stand, really plan ahead. We preach this stuff all the time. I mean, come opening weekend, if something happens, law enforcement's busy.
Yeah, yeah.
We might not just be able to drop everything and come rescue you. So you really got to plan ahead and think.
Yeah, that's a great point. Roughly how many, I don't know, maybe you don't even know this, how many COs are there throughout the state? I mean, like, how big is your jurisdiction, like, when you were going?
So when I was working, my patrol area was 650 square miles. And I don't know what the current number is right now in the state, but typically over the years we averaged 140 to 150 field officers and another 50, you know 40 to 50 administrative type officers. Um, so yeah, most COs areas are pretty big. Yeah.
Um, so that kind of goes along with it too. Not only you might be busy, but you might be an hour away.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah, that's tough. I mean, what is it? Limited funding, or what is it? Why can't we cut that area in half? Is it lack of people going into the profession? What is it?
It's a combination of all of it. It's politics. I remember years ago we tried increasing our numbers, and okay, you get five. Well, that doesn't really do much, but it all comes down to funding and things
Sure.
like that.
Where does, I mean, does that some of your guys' funding come from us as hunters and our licenses and stuff that gets divided up throughout that?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, definitely. There, the license money is divvied out to different parts of
Hmm.
of the DNR, and absolutely has a big. And that's why as hunter numbers start to dwindle, and license sales maybe either go up or go down, it has a big impact on the
Hmm.
whole department and its funding.
Um,
And not to say that it's the most efficient department in spending,
yeah.
but we.
Nah, this brings up a good point because we talked about this uh, before our first recording when I said I was doing a little research on how much money um, the state generates through licenses and registrations. Um, it's a ridiculous amount of money. It's
Yeah,
the most amount of money that the state takes in, and only a portion goes back into fish and wildlife.
yeah,
Um, it's funny because I was reading an article in Deer and Deer Hunting the other day, and the first article I opened up is just Dan Schmidt from Deer and Deer Hunting, and the article was about where's this money going?
yeah,
Accountability. All this money is getting put towards the state with fish and wildlife, and only a small portion gets put back into that. And I know there's necessities out there and stuff, but um, basically what he was doing in the article was calling out his state, saying, where is it? And he was talking about, more people need to, call out their states to see where that money's going at. But I don't know how that process works. I
oh,
just see the numbers, and that's it.
it's a complex process. I couldn't even begin to imagine. But did I see government waste? Oh yeah. I mean, we all see it.
Mm-hmm.
I saw it firsthand in a lot of situations. But I think a lot of times, a lot of the government waste, and this is just my opinion,
Yep.
but a lot of times, a lot of that government waste starts with people that are spending dollars that have no idea what's going on in the field, down at the field level. They don't listen to the field personnel. They aren't out there. They've never done it, but yet they know what's best
Mm-hmm.
when they really don't have the right expertise.
So I think, you know, wildlife biologists. I've listened to so many podcasts. I enjoy listening uh, and learning, and that's why we're doing this here. I want to learn from you and everyone else. But I would say the people that know the most about the wildlife in their area are the people that live there. The
Yes.
farmers, they see the deer numbers. They see what's going on. And recently they've had these deer committee meetings where the public's
Mm-hmm.
invited to come and listen. I I know a few people that went to them. I personally have not gone to them because I don't know how much of a factor the public is when voicing their opinions and what they're seeing and stuff. Because, like you said, there's a lot of other factors that go into deciding on how many deer get shot or what new rules and regulations and stuff. And I don't know. To me, it seems more like, hey, we want to hear you, but we're not going to listen to you. I don't know. Maybe I'm
Well,
wrong.
I without a doubt, you have wildlife managers and fisheries managers that are very connected with the people that live in the area, the farmers, the loggers, and things like that. They listen to them. But you also have managers that can simply sit in the office and just crunch numbers
hmm
and make season determinations and decisions just based on the numbers that the data that gets reported to them.
hmm
Um, and I both are important. But then again, we get into human nature, and some people work harder at their job than others.
Yep. Yep.
So,
Yeah, because I know, like, even when they do deer counts, right?
mhm,
And I know some spots that, I mean, you'd see 100 deer a night, in the winter, and then the deer count would come out, and it shows like there's 25 deer in that area. I'm like,
yeah,
whoa, what's going on here? But that might be something where what I like about what South Dakota does. I I go archery hunting out there every year. I think it's every 3 years I get drawn for a rifle tag. I've only been drawn once so far. But when when the season's over, you are sent a survey in the
oh,
mail,
yeah,
and it says, or email, were you able to harvest the deer? What was it? How many deer did you see? Were you satisfied with the amount of deer you saw? Would you like to see, more or less? I mean, it's a really good survey that I felt like, what, the state's doing a good job of at least hearing what I have to say, by that survey. And I think that's something, I don't know if Minnesota does that now or not, but I think that that'd be a good way to kind of, get some more information from, the general public, the landowners, the farmers, all that stuff
agreed.
on what's going on. Put your zone in there and kind of hear what's all going on there. And if there's some consistency, I like
Well,
that.
I think, and I'm a landowner myself. I think landowners play a way bigger role in deer management than they're given credit for,
Okay.
and that's just
Yeah.
my view.
Okay. Okay. I know one person. I like I like talking to him about deer hunting, but we always discuss the rules and regulations. That was sitting there like, okay, this one's good. This one, I don't know, maybe I would have changed it or something. But what that person always comes back with is, do what you want on your farm. You know, you don't have to shoot 5 deer.
Yeah,
Yeah, you might be
exactly.
given 5 tags,
Yeah,
but you don't have to shoot 5 deer.
exactly,
You want APR? Do APR on your own property.
exactly.
Everybody can kind of do their own thing. Um, but yeah, it's quite interesting how everything works, and it's fun to hear this insight. Let's let's look at people out there, and we were talking about this before we started recording. Law enforcement, in general, um, has become a challenge, without a doubt.
Hmm.
Um, what
Well,
would you, go ahead?
let's look at it this way. So when I first started this job, um, I wasn't wearing a bulletproof vest. I wasn't wearing body armor. I was wearing a long sleeve shirt, collared shirt with a black tie, shiny brass, you know, polished boots, nice creased iron trousers. Now officers today, they're wearing body armor, very tactical type attire, there's a sign of the change in the climate, the culture right there. An officer can't even go out and check a bunch of fishermen without dressing like a SWAT officer. I'm like, what is going on?
Yeah.
I'm so glad I got out when I did.
Yeah.
I feel very blessed. But just that change, is so different. When I got hired, there was 1,000 people that applied for 10 positions. Nowadays, it's less than 100. And I mean, it's changed a lot. It's still, oh man, it's a great job. I had so much fun in my career, and I really did. It was just such a fun job, and a lot of it was the people that I had to work with that made the job fun.
Mm.
But it was just so enjoyable, and I felt like I made a difference. And felt like I accomplished something.
And see, that's the thing. Like, to me, we need people like you out there continuously, forever. And the things that you're seeing online and stuff with, what's going on. I mean, it just deters people from going into that line of work, and
Mm-hmm.
it's frustrating to me. Um, what would what would be your selling point to somebody who might be thinking of going into your line of work, to kind of help motivate them to
Mm-hmm.
be like, you know what, this is a good thing.
The core job is still there. You're still out interacting with sportsmen and sportswomen. You're still out there protecting the resource. That aspect is still there. If a young person going into law enforcement, you just need to wrap your head around today's culture. You're not going to be as respected today as the level of respect has changed over the years. So there's some different challenges in dealing with the culture. But in this line of work, especially in rural Minnesota, where you can get into these small towns, and that was the biggest thing that I learned is become part of that community, interject yourself into that community. You can make a huge difference, a huge difference. And okay, I was there for 28 years. The next person might be there for 10 years, but during that time, do your part to make a difference. And that's really all that's expected.
Yeah, and my advice, to people out there, make sure when you get an opportunity to thank someone, whether it's a conservation officer or a police officer or whatever, anyone in law enforcement, make sure you thank them, because if they're not there, keeping every tabs on everything, obviously things would be a lot worse. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, make sure you're being respectful and thanking these people for doing their job, because that's that's the toughest part, is that for me, like, in my line of profession or any line of work, right? I can't go up and tell a banker how to do their job. They know what's going on in their line of work. Um, yeah, I could be frustrated with them, but they're the one that's the professional in that line of work. They know what they're doing. They've been there before. They've experienced things. Um, it's no different, with law enforcement. They're there. They experience tons of things that we'll never experience in our life, and we just need to appreciate the work that they do for us, like yourself. It takes a special individual to do that.
Yeah.
So very thankful for what you've done throughout the years, Paul, and what everybody is doing for us right now. Um, Lastly, anything you want to add before we close things out here?
Well, just to piggyback onto what you were just saying, each of us has the ability to make a difference in the next generation. You as a school teacher, you're investing time into kids. I spent a lot of time in a local school system investing time in the kids, and I saw such great results and benefits from that. I spent a lot of time in my career training new officers, working at our academy with new people, because to try to make a difference for the next generation. If you're a hunter or a fisherman, getting kids out hunting and fishing, that's, you're investing time in that next generation, and that's huge. It doesn't have to be a big production. Um, in recent years, I've sought out kids and brought them out to my place to hunt to get their first deer type of a situation, and that's been so rewarding. And looking back on my career, some of the most rewarding moments I had was in that classroom talking to a bunch of fourth graders. I'm like, oh my goodness, it doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that each of us can really make a big impact on. If you're a hunter, you've shot a lot of deer in your life. How many more do you really need to shoot?
Yep.
Maybe it's time to give up your deer stand to the next generation,
Yep.
type of a thing.
It's so rewarding. I can remember bringing my cousins out and watching them, harvest their first deer. I was
Mhm.
more excited then than I am when I harvested deer
Yes.
myself. It's so rewarding to
Yes.
see that excitement. That's just one of those things that brings a lot of joy to me. I know I brought one of my coworkers, him and his daughter out a couple years ago and got to witness her, harvesting her first deer. It was a nice doe, and man, was she excited! It was so fun. It's a lot of fun. But
I used to take my kids trapping, and I don't do as much trapping now because my kids are grown and out of the house. But when they were younger, it was so much fun to take them trapping. Just the excitement of walking up on that trap to see what you got today, and that's priceless.
it is,
Yeah.
it is. With that, I think we're going to close it out. I appreciate you
Yeah,
doing
you
this
bet.
interview again.
Sure. Yeah,
But
anytime, man.
all right, thanks everyone for listening.